We are often taught that silence is a virtue, that avoiding conflict is a sign of maturity, wisdom, even peace. But what if this conditioning is not peace at all, but quiet suppression? Nietzsche warned of a moral framework he called slave morality, a system that encourages obedience, passivity, and self-denial in the name of goodness. In such a system, anger is shameful, confrontation is rude, and asserting yourself is mistaken for arrogance. Over time, we internalize these rules. We learn to smile when we want to scream, to agree when we deeply disagree, to shrink ourselves to avoid tension. But behind that smile is a person who feels invisible. Behind every avoided conversation is a buried truth: conflict. When approached with honesty and care, is not violence, it is clarity. It is where authenticity lives. When we fear it, we choose comfort over growth, silence over truth, and harmony over integrity. In doing so, we kill something vital inside us: our voice, our self-respect, our uniqueness. The avoidance of conflict becomes the slow erosion of who we really are. It's easy to confuse peace with politeness, but they are not the same. True peace is built on truth, not denial. And sometimes telling the truth means being uncomfortable. Sometimes it means being disliked. But if we keep swallowing our words, we become strangers to ourselves. So perhaps the question is not, how can I avoid conflict, but what part of myself am I betraying when I do? The betrayal of the self through silence. We often think of silence as strength. Just let it go, we tell ourselves. Be the bigger person. It's not worth the drama. On the surface, these phrases sound mature, composed, emotionally intelligent even. But beneath them, if we listen closely, there is often something else: fear. The fear of being disliked, the fear of confrontation, the fear of seeming selfish or difficult, and sometimes, if we're honest, the fear of losing love altogether. Friedrich Nietzsche had a word for this kind of internal negotiation. He called it slave morality, a value system that praises meekness, submission, and the suppression of one's own instincts for the sake of social approval. It doesn't teach you to be brave. It teaches you to behave, to be agreeable, to be quiet, to sacrifice your own truth for the sake of keeping the peace. And while this may appear civil on the outside, it is often a subtle betrayal of the soul. Every time we silence ourselves to avoid conflict, we do not just avoid discomfort, we abandon something essential. We abandon our own clarity, our own boundaries, and most dangerously, our own dignity. And the tragedy is, we do it not out of malice, but out of habit, out of conditioning. From an early age, we are praised for being good when we're quiet, punished when we express anger, and trained to see disagreement as impolite. Conflict is framed not as a pathway to truth, but as a social threat to be dodged. At its core, conflict is just the meeting of differences, a collision between two truths, two perceptions, or two needs. It does not inherently mean harm. It does not automatically require hostility. Conflict, when approached with care, can be a sacred space where authenticity meets courage. But when avoided out of fear, it becomes a graveyard for unspoken feelings. And when those feelings are buried long enough, they begin to rot from within. Consider this. How many times have you smiled when you felt hurt, nodded in agreement when you wanted to say no, laughed to brush something off when deep down you felt disrespected? Each of those moments, small as they may seem, is a quiet betrayal, not dramatic, not loud, just a subtle nudge away from your center. Over time, they add up, and suddenly you wake up feeling resentful, disconnected not just from others, but from yourself. This kind of self-abandonment is corrosive. It makes us strangers to our own needs. It teaches us that our truth is too dangerous to express. And once we believe that, we begin to question our own instincts. Was I overreacting? Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe I'm the problem. This is the internalization of suppression, and it is the exact mechanism Nietzsche warned us about. Not because silence is always wrong, but because silence born from fear is never truly peace. Modern society often glorifies politeness. We are told that being agreeable is virtuous, that kindness means accommodation, that maturity means swallowing our pride. And while diplomacy has its place, there is a difference between being thoughtful and being invisible. True maturity is not about avoiding friction, it's about knowing who you are in spite of it. There is a high cost to constantly prioritizing social harmony over personal truth. The cost is our voice, and without our voice, we slowly lose our ability to draw boundaries, to ask for what we need, and to live with integrity. Let me be clear, not all silence is self-betrayal. There are times when pausing is wise, when listening is more powerful than speaking, when peace is worth more than winning an argument. But the silence I'm referring to here is different. It's not the silence of reflection, it's the silence of repression. The kind that keeps us stuck in jobs we hate, relationships that drain us, and lives that feel like performances. This silence is not calm, it's frozen, not gentle, but afraid. And what's most painful is that the world often rewards this silence. You'll be seen as easygoing, low-maintenance cool. You won't rock the boat, you'll be accepted. But at what cost? If acceptance requires abandoning your own truth, is it really acceptance or just tolerance? There is a deep difference between peace and pleasing. Peace is born from authenticity, from knowing that even when things are messy, at least they are real. Pleasing, on the other hand, is often a strategy to avoid rejection. It's a mask we wear to stay safe. But safety without self-respect is a cage dressed up as comfort. Eventually, the cost of silence becomes too high. You may start to feel numb. You may find yourself resenting people who don't even know you're upset. Or worse, you may begin to resent yourself for not speaking up when it mattered most. So what can we do? Start small. Start by noticing the moments when you're tempted to stay quiet. Ask yourself, what part of me is trying to speak right now? Is it a boundary that needs to be honored? A truth that wants to be named? A need that deserves to be met? You don't have to shout. You don't have to fight. But you do have to listen to yourself. And sometimes listening means saying something out loud, even if your voice shakes. Remember, this being true to yourself doesn't mean being rude. It means being real. It means choosing self-respect over approval. It means trusting that your truth matters, even if it's uncomfortable. Nietzsche was not against kindness. He was against cowardice disguised as virtue, against submission disguised as morality, against the silencing of the soul for the sake of fitting in. And maybe that's the question we each must ask ourselves. Is my silence an act of wisdom or an act of fear? Because in the end, the greatest conflict is not between you and someone else. It's between your voice and your silence. The historical roots. What is slave morality? If you've ever wondered why society often praises humility over ambition or obedience over assertiveness, you're not alone. Friedrich Nietzsche, the provocative German philosopher, asked the same question over a century ago. And in his radical work on the genealogy of morals, he presented a daring explanation. What we call morality today is not a product of virtue, but of weakness. It is not the legacy of strength and wisdom, but the strategy of the powerless to cope with domination. This is what he called slave morality. To understand Nietzsche's point, we need to step back and examine what he saw as two opposing moral systems: master morality and slave morality. In ancient aristocratic societies, think noble warriors, conquerors, and rulers, moral values emerged from a position of strength. To be good meant to be powerful, bold, honorable, self-assured. Courage, pride, and assertiveness were praised because they reflected vitality and dominance. These were the virtues of the masters, those who shaped the world according to their will. In this value system, weakness, cowardice, and dependency were simply seen as bad, not evil, but inferior, undesirable, something to be overcome. But what about those who were not in power? The conquered, the oppressed, the marginalized. Nietzsche argued that these individuals, powerless to challenge the masters, created a new morality of their own, one that didn't try to rise to power, but instead redefined what power meant. They called the strength of the nobleman evil and their own weakness good. Thus was born slave morality, a reversal of values designed to serve the survival of the oppressed. What's most fascinating and disturbing is how brilliantly effective this strategy was. Instead of directly rebelling against the strong, which was impossible, the weak invented a moral framework that morally condemned strength itself. They labeled pride as arrogance, dominance as cruelty, self-assurance as selfishness. At the same time, they elevated traits like meekness, obedience, patience, and self-denial qualities that naturally aligned with their condition of subjugation. This morality allowed them to feel superior without ever having to rise above their oppressors. It gave them a sense of righteousness from their suffering dignity, from their powerlessness. Nietzsche's insight is this: slave morality is not about truth or justice. It's about psychological survival. It's the cleverness of the downtrodden turning their victimhood into moral superiority. At the heart of slave morality lies ressentiment, a deep, festering resentment that cannot be expressed openly. Because the oppressed cannot act directly against those who dominate them, their anger turns inward, festering into hatred masked as virtue. Instead of saying, "I hate the strong," they say, "The strong are evil." Instead of admitting envy, they moralize it. "He's arrogant," they say of the confident. "She's selfish," they say of the independent. And so the slave turns the mirror, forcing society to see nobility not in strength, but in weakness. Why does this matter? Because this inversion of values didn't just affect a small corner of history, it shaped the very foundation of modern morality. Nietzsche believed that much of Western ethics, particularly the Judeo-Christian moral tradition, is rooted in this slave morality. He saw its influence in the way we glorify humility over pride, sacrifice over self-expression, obedience over independence. This doesn't mean Nietzsche was advocating for cruelty or oppression. He wasn't glorifying tyrants or celebrating domination. His critique was more subtle. He was warning us that many of our so-called virtues might not be virtues at all, but survival tactics, emotional disguises inherited from a long history of powerlessness. Take, for example, the common cultural praise of humility. In many societies, we are told that humility is a virtue, that it is noble to downplay our strengths, to never boast, to remain modest, even when we've achieved something great. But Nietzsche would ask, why is humility truly good? Or have we simply been trained to believe that being small is safer? After all, the proud individual threatens the collective. The self-confident one refuses to conform. And perhaps the truly free person is frightening, not because they're dangerous, but because they cannot be controlled. Similarly, we're told that self-sacrifice is a moral high ground, that giving up our desires for others is honorable. And sometimes, yes, it is. But Nietzsche would again ask, what if that virtue is not always a choice, but a compensation? What if generations of powerless people taught themselves to find meaning in sacrifice because they had no other option? This line of thinking invites a deeply uncomfortable question. Are our values truly chosen, or are they inherited strategies from a time when we didn't have power? Slave morality is seductive. It wraps itself in the language of compassion, kindness, and selflessness, and these are not inherently bad. But Nietzsche's point is that we must examine their origins. We must ask whether we are living by values that empower us or ones that keep us small, compliant, and afraid of our own strength. In today's world, this conversation is more relevant than ever. Many people feel trapped in systems that reward conformity and punish originality. We praise vulnerability, but punish confidence. We teach children to follow the rules, but not to think critically about who made them. And when someone dares to be bold, loud, unapologetic, we often call them arrogant, selfish, or too much. But maybe, just maybe, we say these things not because they are true, but because we've been trained to fear those who remind us of what we gave up long ago. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with a choice. We can continue living by values passed down by centuries of suppression, or we can question them. We can begin to ask, am I being humble because it's right, or because I'm afraid to be seen? Do I stay quiet out of compassion or out of fear? Do I call confidence arrogance because I truly believe it, or because I'm uncomfortable with my own power? Nietzsche's goal wasn't to destroy morality. It was to wake us up, to show us that many of our shoulds are not divine truths, but historical echoes of survival tactics long embedded in our collective psyche. And that true moral growth begins not with blind obedience, but with uncomfortable honesty. The harm of silence, resentment, and self-destruction. There is a heavy cost to silence, not the noble silence of contemplation, nor the gentle silence that listens, but the silence born from fear, shame, or the inability to speak one's truth. This kind of silence is not peace. It is pressure. It is emotional compression. And over time, that compression becomes poison. When a person longs to speak but does not, when they ache to push back but hold themselves still, the energy has nowhere to go. So it doesn't vanish, it turns inward. It curdles into resentment. Nietzsche recognized this transformation and named it clearly ressentiment, a toxic form of resentment that arises when we feel powerless to act, yet still need to make sense of our suffering. Rather than confronting the person or system we believe has wronged us, we internalize the pain, coat it in moral narratives, and wear it like armor. But it is not strength. It is a disguise for despair. Resentment is not just bitterness. It is silent rage trapped behind a mask of virtue. It often sounds like I didn't say anything because I'm better than that. I won't fight back because I'm the mature one. I let it go because I'm kind. On the surface, these sound like ethical choices, but too often they are not true compassion. They are self-deception. This is what makes ressentiment so dangerous. It allows us to pretend we are moral while secretly stewing in unacknowledged fury. We build a story in which we are the righteous victim, the one who endures, the one who suffers in silence. But underneath that story, something darker grows, the quiet realization that we did not stand up for ourselves, that we allowed something to happen that we didn't agree with, that we gave our power away, not because we wanted to, but because we were afraid. Over time, this realization becomes unbearable, and since we cannot or will not direct it at the original source, we begin to direct it at ourselves. We begin to despise our own passivity. We hate that we didn't speak up. We regret not setting a boundary. And yet to maintain the story that we were the good one, we can't admit that. So the resentment doubles back. It becomes self-hatred dressed in moral clothing. This is the tragic illusion Nietzsche saw so clearly, that many people, especially those who consider themselves good, are not acting from true virtue, but from paralysis. They construct an internal world where endurance equals goodness and anger equals evil. But in doing so, they deny a fundamental truth that suppressed anger does not dissolve it, transforms into self-destructive energy. The person who cannot say, "This hurts me," often ends up believing there must be something wrong with me. And in that belief, they begin to shrink. They criticize themselves for being too sensitive. They call their unmet needs unreasonable. And eventually they may even come to believe they deserve the mistreatment, because why else would they feel so small? This is not humility. This is not peace. It is the erosion of self-worth through the repeated denial of one's own voice. Let's be clear. Resentment is not the mark of a victim. It is the mark of someone who once had the chance to resist, but chose silence instead. And that silence, far from being neutral, is a choice. A choice to freeze. A choice to please. A choice to disappear. And when that choice becomes a pattern, it no longer protects us, it defines us. The tragedy of resentment is that it feels righteous. It tells us, you're better because you endured. You're stronger because you swallowed it. But strength is not about how much pain you can internalize. It's about how honestly you can express your limits, your needs, your boundaries. When we choose silence over expression again and again, we are not choosing maturity. We are choosing slow emotional suffocation. What makes things worse is that resentment rarely stays hidden. It leaks into our tone, into our posture, into our relationships. We become curt, passive-aggressive, sarcastic, cold. And yet when asked what's wrong, we say, "Nothing, I'm fine." But we're not. We're exhausted from holding it all in. We're heavy with words that never left our mouths. And in this state, we become difficult to love not because we are unlovable, but because we no longer know how to show up as our true selves. The person we present to the world is guarded, indirect, and defensive, not because we want to be this way, but because we're trying to survive the war we never admitted we were fighting. What would it look like to break this cycle? It would begin with the courage to name the resentment, not to project it onto others or weaponize it, but to acknowledge its presence honestly. To say, I am angry because I felt voiceless. I am hurt because I stayed silent. I am bitter because I betrayed myself in order to appear good. That is where healing begins. Not in pretending we're fine, but in facing the ways we've been dishonest with others. Yes, but most importantly with ourselves. The opposite of resentment is not revenge. It's truth. It's saying, this is how I feel without shame. It's reclaiming our right to discomfort, to disagreement, to boundaries. Of course, it's not always easy. Many of us learned from an early age that expressing anger leads to rejection, that standing up for ourselves leads to punishment. But those were lessons learned in fear, not in wisdom, and we no longer need to live by them. There's a quiet power in saying no, in asking for what we need, in admitting we are not okay. These acts may feel small, even selfish, but they are actually profound acts of integrity. Because every time we choose truth over silence, we take a step away from bitterness and a step closer to self-respect. Nietzsche warned us of the tragic morality that arises from fear, a morality that makes saints of the silent and sinners of the bold. But he also offered hope that we can break free, that we can build a new relationship with our emotions, one that doesn't shame our anger but listens to it, one that doesn't glorify endurance but honors expression. So ask yourself, what am I still holding in? What truth am I afraid to speak? And who might I become if I finally gave myself permission to speak it? Because if we do not let our voice out, it will turn against us. Not out of malice, but out of grief. The way out, the will to power. There is a path forward, a way out of the paralysis, resentment, and self-betrayal that silence breeds. But it is not paved with further passivity or politeness. It does not lie in more endurance, more pleasing, or more avoidance. Nietzsche called this path the will to power, a concept often misunderstood as the desire to dominate others. But in truth, it is something far more personal, more internal, and more life-affirming. The will to power at its core is not about conquest. It is about presence. It is the deep, unshakable impulse within each of us to assert our right to exist fully, to say, I am here, I matter, my truth deserves to take up space. It is the quiet fire that pushes the seed through the soil, the tide against the shore, the heartbeat that refuses to stop. It is life affirming itself not through fear but through expression. Nietzsche saw this force as the antidote to slave morality. While slave morality teaches us to withdraw, to shrink, to obey the will to power, urges us to step forward. It invites us to confront conflict not as destruction, but as necessary tension, as evidence that we are alive, to engage in disagreement, to draw boundaries, to say no without apology. These are not acts of aggression. They are acts of clarity. In a world that rewards compliance, the most radical thing you can do is stand with your back straight and your soul unashamed. Not to dominate others, but to reclaim the authority over your own being. And this begins with rejecting the false virtue of silence. Too often, we equate harmony with goodness. We believe that the absence of conflict equals peace. But Nietzsche challenges this. He suggests that a life devoid of struggle is not peaceful, it is numb. Conflict, when entered with consciousness, is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something real is trying to emerge, that two truths have met, and instead of folding one of them, has chosen to speak. To choose the will to power is to choose to live awake. It means no longer tolerating what quietly kills you, no longer wearing masks that suffocate your voice. It means no longer pretending to be agreeable when your heart is screaming otherwise. You begin to realize that boundaries are not walls, they are the contours of your being. And when you learn to say no, you are not pushing others away. You are pulling yourself back into alignment. This is not easy. Many of us have been raised in environments where confrontation was dangerous, where disagreement was punished, where obedience was rewarded. We learn to bend ourselves into shapes that fit, even if those shapes left us emotionally disfigured. But the will to power invites us to unlearn this. It asks us to remember that we were not born to disappear. We were born to embody ourselves, to speak, to feel, to stand. You begin to understand that not every conflict must be avoided. In fact, some conflicts are sacred. The moment you speak an unpopular truth, or say no to someone's demands, or admit that your needs matter, that moment may be tense. Yes, but it is also holy. It is the moment you stop betraying yourself for the sake of false peace. This does not mean becoming hostile. It does not mean turning cold or unkind. Quite the opposite. The will to power is not about rage. It is about rootedness. It's about standing so firmly in your truth that you no longer need to attack others to defend it. You speak with strength because you are no longer afraid of being wrong. You listen with openness because you are no longer afraid of being changed. And you love more deeply because you no longer resent others for the ways you abandoned yourself. Living with the will to power also means living with responsibility. When you stop silencing your voice, you realize you are responsible for it. You can no longer blame others for your bitterness because you now have the courage to say what you feel. You stop waiting to be rescued. You stop wishing others would read your mind. You stop holding grudges for things you never had the courage to name. Instead, you name them. You speak. You act. You take ownership of your choices, even the painful ones. And in doing so, you find something you may not have felt in years' freedom. Freedom is not the absence of limits. It is the ability to choose them. To live with the will to power is to walk through life with your eyes open. It is to feel fear and move anyway. It is to disappoint others so that you don't abandon yourself. It is to be misunderstood and survive it. You stop living for approval. You start living in truth. The world may push back. Not everyone will applaud your boundaries. Some will accuse you of being difficult, selfish, or cold. But those accusations say more about their comfort with your silence than the legitimacy of your voice. Let them be uncomfortable. Let there be space for truth, because your life is not a performance. It is a flame that was never meant to burn quietly. To live with the will to power is to allow that flame to rise again, not to scorch others, but to illuminate your path, to give you warmth in your own skin, to remind you every time you want to shrink that your aliveness is not a threat. It is a gift. Nietzsche's call is not to war, but to wakefulness, to stop confusing virtue with submission, to stop hiding behind the facade of politeness, to start existing in full form even when it's uncomfortable, because when you stand tall and your soul is unshackled and your boundaries are clear, something powerful happens. You don't just reclaim your voice, you reclaim your life. The 3 spiritual transformations from burden to free. To truly understand freedom, not just political or external liberty, but deep inner freedom, we must first understand the layers of our own conditioning. Friedrich Nietzsche, ever the provocateur and spiritual psychologist, offers one of the most powerful metaphors for this journey in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. In it, he describes 3 metamorphoses of the spirit, the camel, the lion, and the child. These are not mere symbols. They are stages in the soul's evolution. Each one carries its own burden, its own breakthrough, and its own wisdom. Together, they map the journey from submission to creation. 1. The camel, the weight bearer. The journey begins with the camel. It is strong, enduring, and obedient. The camel carries heavy loads across long distances, through dry deserts and harsh winds. This is the spirit in its earliest form, the phase of endurance and duty. It says yes to the weight imposed upon it. It bows to tradition, to expectation, to responsibility. It takes pride in carrying burdens. In this stage, we often define ourselves by how much we can tolerate. We become experts at surviving. We endure emotional pain, societal norms, cultural rules, and family expectations. We say, "This is what I must do." We wear suffering like a badge of honor, believing that virtue lies in sacrifice. There is nobility in the camel's strength, but there is also hidden danger stagnation. A camel does not question the weight it carries, it simply carries it. Many of us live as camels far longer than we should, proud of our discipline, but disconnected from our desires. We become excellent at saying yes, even to things that drain us. We serve systems, rules, or people that do not serve us in return. But eventually, something inside us begins to shift. The burdens grow heavier, and the meaning behind them begins to erode. The soul, weary and cracked by obedience, begins to whisper. Why, that whisper is the beginning of transformation. 2. The lion, the rebel spirit. From the camel emerges the lion. The lion is fierce. The lion says no. It no longer bows, it roars. This is the stage of rebellion where the spirit rises against false authorities and inherited lies. The lion no longer accepts the commandment, "Thou shalt." Instead, it declares, "I will." This transformation is necessary and often uncomfortable. To become the lion is to break away from systems that once defined you. You begin to challenge the beliefs you were taught, the roles you were assigned, the fears you were told to carry. You stop finding pride in how much you can endure and begin to discover power in what you can reject. The lion does not rebel out of hatred, but out of clarity. It sees that many of the burdens it carried were never its own. Cultural expectations, moral codes, even the fear of judgment, these are the dragons it must slay. And the greatest of these dragons is the voice that says, "You must." Nietzsche calls this the dragon of thou shalt. This dragon is not a physical being. It lives in our minds. It is every internalized voice that tells us who we should be. It says, you must be good. You must be obedient. You must not make others uncomfortable. You must fit in. The lion rises against this. It learns to say no, not just to others, but to the inner tyrant. This is the stage of liberation, and yet even the lion in all its power is incomplete. Why? Because the lion can destroy, but it cannot create. It knows what it is not, but not yet what it truly is. It has learned resistance, but not yet spontaneity. Its power lies in defiance, but life is more than defiance. The spirit needs one final transformation. 3. The child, the creator of new values. Enter the child, the most surprising, most delicate, and most powerful of the three. After the rebellion of the lion comes the innocence of the child, not the ignorance of youth, but the purity of creation. The child represents rebirth. It no longer lives in reaction to the past. It does not carry burdens like the camel. It does not rage against commandments like the lion. It simply creates. The child says yes, not to burdens, not to oppression, but to life itself. This is the stage of true spiritual freedom. The child plays, it invents, it laughs, it dances with the unknown. It is not interested in being right, it is interested in being real. It does not follow orders, and it no longer needs to rebel. The child has moved beyond obedience and resistance into authentic expression. The child is not naive. It knows the world is complex, but it no longer sees that complexity as a threat. It sees it as a playground for the soul. To become the child is to step into your creative essence, to move from imitation to originality, from obedience to authorship, from reaction to presence. It is in this stage that we begin to craft our own values, not those given by society, religion, or family, but those born from the center of our being. We are no longer echoing other people's truths. We are speaking our own. The child knows something the camel never dared to imagine, and the lion was too busy fighting to realize that freedom is not found in submission or rebellion. It is found in creation. It is found in being unapologetically, joyfully alive. Bringing it all together, Nietzsche's 3 transformations are not rigid steps, but living movements. At times in life, we must be the camel to endure, to learn to serve. At other times, we must become the lion to resist, to say no, to tear away false identities. And then, if we are brave enough, we step into the child not as a return to immaturity, but as a leap into wisdom. The child is not the beginning, but the flowering of the spirit. The question is not, which stage are you in? The question is, what does your spirit need right now? Are you carrying too much? Become the lion. Are you caught in endless rebellion? Become the child. Because ultimately, the goal is not to be against the world, but to be so rooted in yourself that you can shape your world anew. You are not here to endlessly bear the weight of others' expectations. You are not here to eternally fight the rules of the past. You are here to create, to live with a spirit that plays, that loves, and that dares to begin again. Becoming yourself, become who you are. Become who you are. Simple words, yet they hold within them a lifelong challenge. This was Nietzsche's call, not a gentle invitation, but a demand hurled into the heart of every individual. It is not a suggestion for self-discovery tucked inside a self-help book. It is a radical confrontation with life itself. But how do we become who we are? It sounds paradoxical. If we already are ourselves, why do we need to become anything? Nietzsche's answer is clear. Most of us live far from our true nature. We perform, we imitate, we conform. We inherit values, identities, and expectations, and we wear them like costumes on a stage, believing the play is our life. But it isn't. Without even realizing it, we often live as strangers to ourselves. To become who you are is not to look inward and find a pre-existing real self hiding under the surface. It is to forge yourself in the fire of experience to shape your identity in full contact with the world. And that process, messy, painful, and deeply human, requires one thing above all conflict. Nietzsche believed that the self is not found in comfort, but in confrontation. It is not peace that reveals who we are, but struggle. When life is easy, when everyone agrees, when our values go unchallenged, we may feel content, but we do not grow. There is no need to examine ourselves to draw a line in the sand or to declare, "This is me." But place someone in the middle of tension, of contradiction, of disagreement, and then watch what emerges. Conflict is the mirror in which the true self is reflected. Think of the moments that shaped you most. Were they soft? Were they polite? Or were they moments when you had to choose? When your beliefs clashed with someone else's? When you were forced to speak, even though it scared you? That's the forge. That's where character is built. And that's where Nietzsche invites us to go, not to avoid conflict, but to step directly into its heat. He's not celebrating hostility. He's not asking us to pick fights or reject others for the sake of ego. What he's pointing toward is a deeper truth. Without resistance, there is no definition. You cannot know the boundaries of your being until something presses against them. Only in those moments do you find out what you actually believe, what you are willing to protect, and who you truly are beneath the noise. In avoiding conflict, we often think we're preserving peace, but more often we are avoiding ourselves. We say yes when we mean no. We smile when we're breaking inside. We nod to keep things smooth. But each of these moments carves a distance between us and our authenticity. And the longer we avoid that distance, the emptier we feel. Nietzsche warns us of this hollowness. A life lived without friction may seem safe, but it becomes a stage, a carefully scripted performance. You say the right lines, you wear the right mask, you play your part. But inside, there is no fire, no truth, no you. The self does not emerge fully formed. It must be wrestled into being. And wrestling implies friction. It implies discomfort. It implies pain. That is the path. It is not for the timid, nor for those addicted to external approval. To become who you are is to risk misunderstanding. It is to risk being alone. It is to look at everything you were taught and ask, is this mine? Do I truly believe this, or was I simply too afraid to disagree? This is the terrifying beauty of Nietzsche's challenge. It does not offer comfort, it offers clarity. It demands that we stop pretending, that we stop hiding behind politeness or fear, and that we confront our lives as if they were our own creation, because they are. And conflict is not just external, it is internal as well. We each carry a war within between who we are and who we were told to be, between our longings and our limitations, between the person we show the world and the one we face in silence. Becoming yourself means standing in the middle of that war and refusing to flinch. It means choosing again and again the path of integrity over the path of ease. So how do we begin? Start with discomfort. Pay attention to the moments that make you uneasy, not because they're wrong, but because they reveal a boundary, a need, a truth trying to rise. These are clues. Don't silence them. Don't push them away with false positivity or quick distractions. Lean in, ask hard questions. Why did I stay quiet just now? Whose approval am I seeking? What am I afraid will happen if I speak up? Is this belief mine or was it inherited? These questions will not make you feel better right away, but they will make you real. And slowly, piece by piece, a new foundation begins to form. You learn to say no without guilt. You learn to say yes without shame. You begin to act not out of habit, but from awareness. And perhaps most radically, you start to see conflict not as something to fear, but as something to welcome. Because it means you are awake. It means you are alive. To live this way is not easy. It is raw. It is often lonely, but it is honest. And in that honesty, there is power. A power not to dominate, but to define. Not to control others, but to create yourself. Become who you are. It is not a one-time event. It is a practice. A burning away of illusion. A devotion to what is true, even when it's uncomfortable. It is the willingness to live a life that is not a performance, but a presence. And perhaps this is Nietzsche's final gift. Not a set of rules, not a map, but a fire. A reminder that within each of us is something untamed, something sovereign, something that refuses to be reduced. Not everyone will understand. That's okay, because becoming who you are was never about them. It was always about you. Silence is not goodness, it is complicity. There is a comforting myth that silence is a virtue, that if you say nothing, you are neutral, that staying quiet means staying clean, safe from conflict, above the mess, innocent of harm. But this is a dangerous illusion, because silence, especially in the face of injustice, is not innocence. It is complicity. Each time we witness something wrong and remain quiet, we are not standing on the sidelines, we are standing with the oppressor. Friedrich Nietzsche never romanticized silence. He understood its seduction. Silence appears calm. It seems wise. It's rewarded with social approval. But Nietzsche's philosophy warns us what we call virtue is often cowardice in disguise. And what we label as peace is sometimes just the absence of moral courage. Let us speak plainly. Every time you stay silent in the presence of injustice, you are not avoiding harm, you are allowing it. Silence is not a shield, it is a signal. It tells the world, I will not interfere. And in systems of power, whether in relationships, workplaces, cultures, or nations, that silence becomes part of the machinery of oppression. It strengthens the abuser. It weakens the truth. It makes the victim feel invisible. And worst of all, it eats at your own sense of self. Because deep down, you know, you saw it, you heard it, you felt it. But you did not act. You said nothing. You looked away. You swallowed your discomfort and wore a mask of indifference. And that moment, small as it may seem, became a crack in your own dignity. When you silence yourself again and again, you begin to fracture inside. You start to question your integrity. You wonder, do I even stand for anything? You tell yourself you're being mature or strategic. But in truth, you're just afraid. Afraid of judgment, afraid of conflict, afraid of losing approval, afraid of being disliked. But let us be honest, a dignity built on approval is not dignity at all. It is dependency, and worse still, silence makes you a target. When you are quiet in the face of mistreatment, People assume you will always be quiet. Abusers look for silence not to spare your feelings, but to ensure they can continue unchecked. And each time you accept what is unacceptable, you teach others how little you expect for yourself. So silence does not protect you. It marks you. It tells others you are safe to disregard. That is the quiet horror of complicity. It does not happen with a scream. It happens in small silences day after day, until one day you find that your voice is gone, not because someone took it, but because you stopped using it. And what is left then? A life of politeness. A persona carefully managed. A soul haunted by the echoes of words never spoken. In the name of being good, you become passive. In the name of avoiding conflict, you abandon truth. You perform your way through life, convincing others, and maybe even yourself, that everything is fine. But it's not fine. You feel it in your chest, in the heavy silence after a conversation that didn't go the way it should, in the way your body tightens when someone crosses a line and you pretend not to notice, in the resentment that simmers when you say yes to something you wanted to refuse. You tell yourself it's not a big deal, but it is. Because over time, those tiny betrayals of your voice become a betrayal of your entire self. And slowly you forget what you ever stood for. There comes a moment, if you're lucky, when you can no longer bear the silence, when the weight of what you haven't said becomes heavier than the fear of saying it. That moment is sacred. It is the beginning of awakening. It is the moment you say, I choose to be silent no more. This is not a call to rage. This is not a call to violence or cruelty. It is a call to presence, to reclaim your voice, your truth, your dignity. Speaking up does not mean shouting. It does not mean humiliating others. It means honoring your own sense of justice even when your voice trembles. It means knowing that your silence is not neutral. It is an action one with consequences. And it begins with a simple sentence where it's written, whispered, or shouted into the night. I choose to be silent no more. Write it down. Let your hand shake if it must. That sentence is not just ink on paper. It is a declaration, a turning point, a refusal to continue playing dead in your own life. It says, I will no longer hide behind politeness. I will no longer betray myself for harmony. I will no longer make myself small to keep others comfortable. I will no longer pretend that neutrality is kindness, because neutrality in the face of injustice is not kindness, it is permission. Nietzsche's philosophy is not comfortable because truth is not comfortable. He doesn't want you to feel good about your silence. He wants you to feel the weight of it. The truth is, our silence often says more about us than our words do. It reveals our fears, our loyalties, our limits. But truth is also liberating. Once you see it, once you admit it, you can change. You don't have to keep playing the role of the quiet one, the easy one, the one who takes it all. You can become the one who chooses, the one who speaks, the one who refuses to let their silence become someone else's permission slip to harm. So let this be the beginning, not of noise for noise's sake, not of conflict for ego's sake, but of clarity. Clarity that your voice is not dangerous, it is sacred, that your truth is not offensive, it is necessary, that your boundaries are not rude, they are wise, and that silence, when used to avoid discomfort, is not peace. It is the quiet collapse of self. Choose something different. Choose to be silent no more. Conflict is not the enemy avoidance. Nietzsche did not glorify violence. He did not encourage cruelty or chaos. What he offered was far more radical and far more difficult, an invitation to face conflict with honesty. Because in his view, it is only in the heat of tension that we begin to forge who we really are. He believed that the self is not something we are simply handed. It is something we become through confrontation, through resistance, and through the uncomfortable courage to live our own truth. And that journey cannot happen in silence. It cannot happen in obedience. It cannot happen while hiding behind politeness, fear, or the illusion of harmony. The more we avoid conflict, the more we abandon ourselves. Not because conflict is pleasant, but because it is real. Every avoided conversation, every swallowed truth, every forced smile in the face of injustice, it all chips away at our integrity. We may convince ourselves that we are being kind, mature, or diplomatic, but often we are simply afraid, and in that fear we shrink. But shrinking is not virtuous. It is the quiet erosion of life itself. Nietzsche warns us that silence is not neutral. Silence in the face of harm is not a passive gesture. It is an active contribution to what is wrong. When we refuse to speak up, we are not standing apart from the problem. We are participating in it. Our silence tells the abuser that they can continue. It tells the victim that they are alone. And it tells ourselves that our voice does not matter. This is the tragedy of complicity. It doesn't come with a scream. It comes with a whisper, a decision not to get involved, not to disturb the peace, not to make things harder. But in the long run, that peace is false. It's not peace at all. It's paralysis. And obedience, that too is not a virtue in Nietzsche's eyes. It is often the most socially acceptable form of self-abandonment. We follow rules that do not serve us. We accept values we did not choose. We say yes when we mean no. We let others define our worth, our role, our limits. And the more we do this, the more disconnected we become, not just from others, but from our own aliveness. To obey without question is to stop thinking. To obey without awareness is to stop living. Nietzsche's solution is not rebellion for its own sake. It's not about becoming aggressive or unkind. It's about reclaiming authenticity. It's about developing the strength to say, "This is me," even when the world disapproves. It's about standing in the fire of disagreement without losing your center. It's about speaking not to win, but to be real. To face conflict is to enter the arena of transformation. It is where values are tested, where identities are sharpened, where dignity is restored. If you never say no, you never learn what you truly value. If you never resist, you never build the muscle of integrity. If you never face discomfort, you never meet your actual self. Nietzsche's challenge is not easy. It demands self-honesty. It demands responsibility. But more than anything, it demands courage. The courage to stop pretending, to stop complying, and to start living from within. The world does not need more obedient people. It needs more awake people. People who are not afraid of truth. People who speak with clarity, not cruelty. People who set boundaries without shame. People who understand that silence is not safety and conflict is not failure, but a portal into wholeness. So let this be the message. The more you avoid conflict, the further you drift from yourself. The more you stay silent, the more you enable what is wrong. The more you submit without question, the more you deny your own existence. To live truthfully is to live with a spine and a soul. To speak your truth is not arrogance, it is alignment. And to face conflict not with aggression, but with presence, is the beginning of real freedom. As Nietzsche might whisper through the centuries, become who you are and let the world adjust. related ideas and key concepts from Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most influential and controversial philosophers of the 19th century, laid the foundation for many modern explorations of individuality, morality, and inner strength. Across his major works, On the Genealogy of Morals, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and Ecce Homo, he developed a series of powerful concepts that challenge conventional thinking and encourage radical self-honesty. At the heart of Nietzsche's philosophy is his critique of slave morality. In Genealogy of Morals, he argues that traditional morality, especially in Western culture, is not born from strength but from weakness. It is a value system created by those who feel powerless, who cannot act directly against the strong. Instead, they label traits like pride, confidence, and assertiveness as evil, and celebrate obedience, humility, and self-sacrifice as good. But Nietzsche saw this not as true virtue, but as a survival tactic, a morality built on resentment. This resentment or ressentiment is not ordinary anger. It is a deep, festering emotional state that grows when a person feels powerless to express themselves. Over time, instead of confronting those who have harmed them, they turn their frustration inward or disguise it in moral superiority. It's the quiet bitterness that says I'm better because I suffer silently. But Nietzsche believed this kind of thinking slowly poisons the soul, eroding one's vitality and authenticity. In contrast, Nietzsche introduced the idea of the will to power. This is not about dominating others, it is about affirming life. It is the inner drive to grow, to create, to express, to assert one's existence boldly. The will to power is the antidote to passivity. It calls us to stop hiding behind inherited values and instead live with clarity, strength, and purpose. One of Nietzsche's most poetic contributions comes in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, where he describes the metamorphosis of the spirit in 3 stages. The camel who bears burdens without question, the lion who learns to say no and reject false authorities, and the child who embodies innocence and creativity, joyfully creating new values. This transformation is the path toward liberation, not from rules alone, but from fear. All of this culminates in Nietzsche's famous imperative, become who you are. It's a call not to discover a static identity, but to forge it, through conflict, choice, and creation. Becoming who you are means shedding layers of conditioning and daring to live as your most truthful, embodied self. Nietzsche's ideas remain relevant today because they demand something we often avoid: courage. Courage to face discomfort, courage to reject lies, courage to stop performing and start becoming. Conclusion: the courage to begin again. This is not just a philosophical video, it is a mirror, a quiet, powerful reflection on the illusions we've inherited, the silence we've maintained, and the identities we've worn to feel safe. Nietzsche does not offer comfort, he offers confrontation. He pulls back the curtain on the morality we've accepted without question, morality rooted not in strength but in fear. He shows us how easily we confuse obedience with virtue, how often we mistake silence for peace, and how willingly we trade truth for approval. But he also offers something else: a path, a way forward, a call to the spirit to begin again. Let go of the camel. Stop carrying burdens that were never yours to bear. Stop defining your worth by how much you can endure. Your suffering is not a badge of honor. Become the lion. Learn to say no. Stand tall in the face of false commandments. Reject the voices that tell you who you should be. Tear down what no longer serves you, not out of rage, but out of reverence for your own becoming. And then live as the child. Create, dance, play, speak, not as rebellion, but as truth. Not in reaction to the world, but an expression of your own essence. The child is not immature, it is free. This is the spiritual rebirth Nietzsche speaks of. It is not given, it is claimed. And it begins when you stop being afraid of conflict and start honoring the voice within. So write it down, speak it clearly. I choose to be silent no more. And from that moment, your real life begins.